To meeting number 23 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Pursuant to the orders of reference of April 11 and May 26, 2020, the committee is resuming its study of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Today's meeting is taking place via video conference, and the proceedings will be made available on the House of Commons website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. I would like to remind everyone to please use the language channel of the language they are speaking. I want to begin by thanking our witnesses for their patience with our aborted attempt at this meeting last week and with their cooperation in agreeing to reappear this week. And I also want to let members of Parliament know that for our second panel, less than 2 hours ago, we received a cancellation from MKO. So we only have one witness for the second panel. The witnesses on the first panel have graciously agreed to remain. So for the first hour, we're going to have representatives from Homeward Trust Edmonton and Mortgage Professionals Canada. For the second hour, Front d'Action Populaire en Réaménagement Urbain, as well as the first hour witnesses. So just so that you can get your head around that. And without further ado, I want to welcome Susan McGee and Gary Puligandla from Homeward Trust Edmonton, as well as Elaine Taylor and Paul Taylor from Mortgage Professionals Canada. I understand Ms. McGee is going to be doing the presentation for Homeward Trust. You have the floor. Ms. McGee, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction. Yes, I am the Chief Executive Officer for Homeward Trust, and we are a community-based organization utilizing a system planning approach to ending homelessness in our community of Edmonton. We are the local entity supporting the implementation of Reaching Home, and we have actively supported the evolution of Canada's national housing and homelessness strategies. I was very privileged and fortunate to sit on the Advisory Committee on Homelessness, chaired at the time by Parliamentary Secretary Adam Vaughan, and sit currently on a number of national committees. I'm joined today by Giri, our Chief Strategy Officer, and I expect that there will be some questions that he'll be better at answering than I. But we also want to allow time for that. So quite quickly, we and our partner agencies have been recognized nationally and internationally for our collective efforts to end homelessness, housing nearly 11,000 people since the beginning of our Housing First program in 2009. Our organization brings together funding from all orders of government to support service providers, Indigenous communities, and government partners in Edmonton to collectively plan action and monitor our solutions to end homelessness in our community. We're grateful for the opportunity to speak today about the Government of Canada's response to COVID-19 and what is needed to ensure that vulnerable and homeless Canadians are supported and protected on the long road ahead. It has been just 6 months since COVID-19 and the risks it presents to our community members required a complete rethinking of our priorities and programs. This has been an intense and exhausting effort, but one that we can be proud of, and wouldn't have been possible without the quick mobilization of resources from municipalities and provinces, and indeed the federal government. For Edmonton's homeless response, Reaching Home funding played a critical role. Funding was committed early, processes were accelerated, and both local organizations and federal program staff were empowered to make necessary decisions, building on existing accountable relationships. For many of us involved, the lasting reflection is that we can and should continue to respond that way, treating homelessness as the national emergency that it is in any situation. Homer Trust is a strong supporter of Recovery for All and the 6-point plan already presented to government by the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And we support other national organizations such as CHRA and their advocacy for greater investments in affordable housing and specifically in Indigenous-led housing investments. Rather than reiterate those well-considered positions, we will focus on what we consider to be critical and immediate steps to support their successful implementation. First is that our country requires a sustained investment to make sure communities' Herculean achievements over the last 6 months, and it's been a sprint, have the endurance over the marathon that lies ahead. With no commitment on the horizon, planning has ceased and programs are wound down while individuals are exposed to the same health and safety risks that we experienced in March from the beginning. Secondly, that all orders of government focus efforts on not only protecting vulnerable Canadians from the pandemic, but address many systemic issues that have made people vulnerable to homelessness in the first place. The pandemic has laid bare these system failures, and we can't unsee what we have seen. Lastly, the government reinforces communities in leading this response in a coordinated system planning approach, bringing together the various cross systems and interjurisdictional roles that, operating independently, risk recreating the system failures we are working so hard to address. On the first point of sustained investment, there is no question that all orders of government recognize that we are many months, if not years, from this pandemic being completely behind us. There are more waves on the horizon, and perhaps most critically, large numbers of people losing their jobs, families in crisis, losing homes, and their mental health is being significantly affected. We've never experienced anything like the initial pandemic response before, and there is no precedent, certainly in our lifetime, for the economic and fiscal fissures that are already forming. Initial investments were made quickly, and we were fortunate to have strong program infrastructure and partners to work with to activate those resources. In Edmonton, our response prioritized mobilizing critical services in an alternate location as agencies, public spaces, and other locations, often providing respite for homeless individuals, closed. We brought in our Coordinated Access and Housing First program with additional rapid rehousing and diversion efforts, and included new partners in prevention initiatives by providing immediate funding to address short-term needs. We were able to secure and head lease a hotel to provide bridge housing, and it has played an important role in our community's response to house over 600 people, actually over 700 to date, since April. In the absence of sustained funding, we are faced with contracting all of those efforts at a time when we are seeing significant increases in homelessness and encampments at a scale not seen in Edmonton since 2007. We know that housing is a solution to homelessness, and we have seen the direct health risks to those without a home. We cannot build our way out of this situation fast enough, but we can ensure our pandemic response results in long-term permanent solutions if program funding is sustained and targeted. There is a role for all governments and charitable funders in supporting our efforts, but it is important to recognize that community-based providers are reeling from lost fundraising revenue and staff capacity and will have difficulty dealing with the onslaught of need, let alone existing demand. It is imperative that the federal government lead with a commitment now. Reaching Home has incorporated many important changes in community planning approaches, emphasizing evidence-based models, clear accountabilities, and system-wide engagement. This means having the infrastructure to enable a culture of knowledge-driven decision-making so our interventions can be targeted, evaluated, and corrected continually, and taxpayers can be confident that public dollars are achieving the results they'd expect. As such, I have great confidence that continued investment through Reaching Home will have the greatest immediate impact. This brings me to my second point, that the pandemic response has to address the foundational issues that contribute to poverty and homelessness, especially those that are institutional in nature. The homeless population is dynamic. There are no clean boundaries between people who use shelters, people who sleep rough or in encampments, and people who are unstably housed, and people who are living with friends and family. With rising unemployment, bankruptcies, and evictions, people in housing insecurity before the pandemic will become homeless. Addiction and mental health issues are increasing rapidly and threatening the ability of families and individuals to stay resilient. Yet for homelessness and vulnerable populations, various systems and government departments get involved in a way that creates a patchwork of responses with huge gaps and blind spots and far too many unmet needs. Their roles are often defined by narrow mandates and cost containment without a holistic sense of how all their parts interact, and they don't. As an effective pandemic response for the homeless population has to incorporate commitments to fix the underlying systemic problems that create and sustain homelessness. There may not seem to be an obvious first step to address this issue. Indeed, governments have spent years in system planning meetings trying to turn the Titanic in an inch of water. However, during the pandemic, we have seen health authorities actively participate in local efforts, and they have been required to address the specific risks homeless community members are exposed to. The pandemic has highlighted how quickly we can adjust how we work together when the urgency and will is there. This leads to my final point, which is about the importance of community-based leadership on the pandemic response. In March, community organizations were navigating shifting and sometimes conflicting authorities among the federal government, provincial ministries, health authorities, and local governments. Siloed internal command structures and interjurisdictional confusion can threaten an effective and comprehensive pandemic response. One of our key roles as community entities is as a system planner organization is to transcend and bridge across these chasms so we can enable communities to do what needs to be done. In many ways, governments and systems need to take a back seat to let communities lead the way. They have the knowledge, experience, and relationships to ensure we are doing what is best for vulnerable people. This means empowering and resourcing communities to enable community-level leadership and governance. It also means building the necessary infrastructure so community partners can implement actions collectively and leverage resources and strengths across the board without having to maneuver between funding and institutional roles. Reaching Home clearly embraces the role of local leadership, and as such has been able to deploy resources quickly during this time and has demonstrated impact. While other investments are considered, whether to support housing development or mitigate housing loss, we strongly recommend that reinforcing community-level leadership and coordinating that deployment of those resources. In summary, for an effective pandemic response, the federal government needs to commit to supporting community-based leadership with funding and policy that can address two public health emergencies: the recent and ongoing impacts of COVID-19 and the long-standing institutional causes of homelessness. Continuing investments by the federal government are the only way to ensure that community efforts and achievements over the past 6 months are sustained, and we don't regress in our ability to protect vulnerable people and the impacts of the pandemic in the long run. A critical component of this is to accelerate efforts to realize an end to homelessness, including the 6-point recovery plan put forward by the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and intentional engagement with provincial and municipal governments to support communities in making this happen by transforming systems so that they facilitate instead of hinder their work. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee today, and we are certainly here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. McGee. And next, we're going to hear from Mortgage Professionals Canada, Ms. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. On behalf of the over 12,000 members of Mortgage Professionals Canada, thank you for providing the opportunity to take part in the discussions today. My name is Elaine Taylor, Vice President of Sales for MCAP Corporation and Chair of Mortgage Professionals Canada's Board of Directors. Also with me today is Paul Taylor, no relation, President and CEO of MPC. For additional context for our remarks today, I'd like to remind the committee of MPC's membership composition. We are a professional association promoting mortgage broker-originated mortgages. By headcount, mortgage brokers and agents across Canada make up the largest component of our membership. However, almost all Canadian banks and mortgage lenders that originate mortgages through independent agents and brokers also belong to our association. Additionally, all 3 mortgage insurers in Canada are also members. Because of the diverse nature of our member businesses and their respective role in fulfilling broker-originated mortgages, MPC has a thorough understanding of the marketplace impacts of any changes to mortgage financing and funding costs, securitization and liquidity, underwriting criteria and lending guidelines, and changing consumer behaviors. To our remarks today, we would like to thank the government for many of the measures taken to ensure economic and liquidity support for Canadians and businesses alike. Specifically for our industry, the reintroduction of the Insured Mortgage Purchase Program, with its newly increased stated limit of $150 billion, provided much needed access to capital for banks and other lenders. Additionally, the reduction of the domestic stability buffer also added $300 billion of liquidity to banks to be able to support struggling businesses through additional extensions of credit. The reductions to the Bank of Canada benchmark rate also occurred during this time. We're supportive of all of these changes and the speed with which these mechanisms were brought to bear. As an industry, we were reassured by the timely and coordinated macroeconomic support brought forward. One suggestion we may offer for OSFI to consider, following the same thought process as the already implemented reduction in the domestic stability buffer, reduce the capital requirements for mortgage insurers. This would allow them to reduce their required premiums, making access to the IMPP and other programs easier for lenders and borrowers. The Canadian Emergency Response Benefit and the innumerable suite of cash flow and credit support programs were tremendously supportive to many of our independent and smaller mortgage brokerages. Making CERB accessible to non-EI eligible income earners was greatly appreciated.
Thanks, Elaine. Switching gears somewhat, the industry with government support has been providing mortgage payment deferrals to many mortgage holders. Current Canadian Bankers Association statistics suggest 16% of all mortgage holders have at some point since March deferred at least one payment. And in testimony to FINA, CMHC President Evan Siddle warned this number could reach 20% or 1 in 5, and that these deferrals may all become mortgages in arrears when these programs expire in September, October. I'm happy to report that the experience of our member mortgage lenders is much more optimistic. Many borrowers who took advantage of the deferral program have since voluntarily resumed their payments and opted out. Participation numbers are falling, not increasing. And public records of these results are available in recent releases by Equitable Bank and Home Trust to their shareholders. While this is encouraging news, we do, however, anticipate there will be some mortgage holders who will find themselves unable to meet their mortgage obligations when the deferral period expires. So the general expectation is that these families will be forced to sell their homes and that this influx of housing inventory to the market will create price softening as more housing options are available to buyers. So it's with this expectation that we make two requests. Firstly, consider extending the deferral period for those truly unable to meet their obligations but expected to return to work in the near term. If OSFI were to implement a portfolio percentage maximum permissible to continue to not be considered a non-performing loan, lenders would ensure appropriate means testing and targeting of this continued support. Permitting lenders this capital relief for 5% of loans within their portfolio will assist those Canadians most affected by the pandemic to stay in their homes. And we would recommend extending this provision for at least another 6 months. Secondly, given the possible price softening expected in some markets, and with the recent and unambiguous assurance from the new Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem that interest rates will stay low for a very long time, we ask for the immediate implementation of the previously announced but postponed adjustments to the insured and uninsured mortgage stress tests. Today's uninsured mortgage qualification requires borrowers to show that they're able to manage their mortgage payments at a fictionally higher interest rate, either 2 percentage points above the negotiated contract rate or the Bank of Canada's posted 5-year rate, whichever is higher. In the past year, as interest rates have fallen, and recently as the Bank of Canada has significantly reduced its overnight rates, the posted 5-year rate has not moved in lockstep. In fact, it's only moved incrementally, as is evidenced by the very small 15 basis point reduction last week. And so today, many borrowers are having to prove mathematically that they can manage a mortgage payment at an interest rate of almost 3% higher than their contract rate. If the proposed changes were enacted, really simply, the stress test would effectively be reduced from what is currently almost 300 basis points to 200 basis points, or from 3% to contract plus 2%. Remembering that this test is in addition to existing debt service ratio maximums, This implementation will permit more would-be owner-occupiers to purchase their first home while still ensuring stringent underwriting and qualification mechanisms are in place. If real estate prices do come down in the upcoming months, that's exactly the time we should be encouraging young and aspiring middle-class Canadians to purchase a home. Excluding them from the marketplace will only serve to widen the wealth gap, leaving more homes for investor purchases rather than would-be owner-occupiers. Lastly, Mortgage Professionals Canada has additional recommendations related to housing finance, insurable 30-year amortization options specifically to support first-time buyers, increasing the maximum insurable value of a property, and create an exemption to the aforementioned stress test for renewing borrowers who wish to change lenders. We'll continue these discussions. We're happy to elaborate further on some of those during the question period, but for the sake of brevity today in our opening statements, we'll stick strictly to just the implementation of the previously announced test adjustment and the extension of the deferral program if possible. And thank you very much indeed to everybody for your attention and for the opportunity to present today. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor and Ms. Taylor. And we are going to begin with questions now, starting with Ms. Cusey for the Conservatives for 6 minutes. You're on mute there, Ms. Cusey.
Pardon me, before I move to my questions, I wanted to bring a notice of motion to the committee, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That the committee call upon the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation to appear before the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities before September 30th, 2020 as part of our study on the government's response to COVID-19, and that they appear for no less than 2 hours.
Very well. Mr. Clerk, I believe that this does touch on the business of the committee. Ms. Cusey, is it your wish that this serve as notice of motion, or do you want the motion debated now?
Well, as I understand, I can only provide notice of motion today, given that it is not under committee business. However, if you deem it relevant under COVID-19 business, then certainly we can move to discussion at this point. But alternatively, as I did mention, this is the notice of motion. So given that we have witnesses here today, we can perhaps take a half an hour aside or put some time aside for our next meeting, at which time we can discuss it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cusey. I'm happy to set aside time at a future meeting. I would, however, say that CMHC seems to me to be a relevant witness. It would simply be a matter of adding them to the witness list. I think the only thing that's particularly unique about the motion is the request that they be there for 2 hours. But we may or may not need to debate this. But thank you for providing notice, and go ahead with your 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Taylor, thank you very much for being here today. I'm sure you saw in the news recently that media had reported that CMHC will study the prospect of a federal home equity tax that would see residences taxed as capital gains. So how would a home equity tax impact the housing market, please?
You think I'd be better at this by now? Thank you very much indeed for the question. I think a tax on equity would alter an awful lot of things, actually, and would probably be really detrimental in a number of different ways. But to be fair, I think that the study that's been conducted by CMHC is actually really more through an academic grant that's been provided to a think tank in BC. I don't know if it's specifically a policy that is being investigated directly by CMHC. That said, I do think it would be not a very good policy to be implementing in Canada at this point. An awful lot of folks within, I would say, the aspiring middle class, as well as the established middle class, frankly, have been considering that their home is their largest asset. By virtue of us having that tax haven on a primary residence for an awful long time, it has been, I think, for most, the nest egg or the center point of their retirement funding. And so to what would likely feel like changing the rules on their investment strategy midterm, you likely would end up eroding the value of the retirement portfolios of a significant number of Canadians today. That would have additional knock-on effects to the grander economy through very traditional sort of wealth effect issues that any economist would tell you about. Certainly not a good day for the grander economy from a continuation of fund and fluidity, I would say.
So you talked in your opening statement about first-time home buyers. Do you think a home equity tax would make it more difficult for first-time home buyers wanting to enter and to invest into the real estate market?
As I understand the structure of what's been proposed, because the tax is due at the time that you sell your home, I actually don't think it would make much of a difference to folks who are considering entering into the space, but it definitely does alter the value proposition, if you will, for folks who previously would have been considering it as what is potentially something to pursue, not only for the security of having a place that's your own, where a landlord cannot determine that they need to sell the property out from under you or move a family in. There's an awful lot of security in housing that is available to folks that own their own home. But if the investment advantage, if you will, of the tax haven for a primary residence is removed, I think it would certainly affect people's decision to potentially enter the market.
So we talked a little bit about what you think the impact on the housing market would be. But we often think of how currently the current Reaching Home plan does not consider moving people further along the housing continuum. So how do you think that the home equity tax would impact the housing continuum as a whole in an effort to move people away from homelessness and along the housing continuum? Do you think an equity tax would have any impact on that, and how? Where do you see the pinch marks in that?
Comment on that without having a really good understanding of what a proposed structure of that tax would look like. I think it would be disastrous to simply implement as a switch a 50% capital gains tax on the equity for everybody all at the same time. So I envision if such a thing was ever actually to be contemplated to be implemented, it would have to be tiered over time. And if that's the case, then the impact would be really difficult to understand without seeing exactly how the tiering is actually going to occur through that period. I can tell you today, though, because home equity without the tax tends to be the largest driver of net wealth creation for individuals, it's also the thing that has permitted people to graduate through the housing continuum, as you've described there. A young couple might start in a condominium with one bedroom. As the family starts to grow, they'll move into a 2 or 3 bedroom home. And it's quite specifically because they're able to retain not only the equity increase if there's a potential increase in the property itself, but the forced savings of the mortgage itself actually helps to create wealth so that they're able to make the next step into that larger property. If they were to have to sacrifice some of the equity to a tax, it would make the process of moving through that continuum a slower process and would potentially constrain people to smaller residences at the onset of the tax. But it's really difficult to comment on that without fully understanding what the structure of such a tax would actually look like when it would, purportedly be implemented.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, and thank you, Ms. QC. Next on my list is Ms. Young, but I have a note that she is having some technical difficulties and is trying to get back on. So the next slot is for the Liberals. Mr. Vaughn, would you like to proceed, or is there someone else on the Liberal side ready to go?
I'm good to go.
Thank you. You have 6 minutes.
Just a very quick reassurance, Mr. Taylor, that the minister and the head of CMHC have both rejected the idea and communicated that to your organization. And the line of questioning we just heard, while interesting, is not applicable to any policy decision the government's going to make. Mr. Taylor? We've communicated that we're not pursuing that idea under any circumstance. That's being communicated to you?
It has to me. You will know yourself, actually, once the news actually broke that the CMHC was studying such a thing. We reached out to your office directly. I think you're one of the first, actually, to assure us that even though there is, I think CMHC, probably quite rightly, has certain funding arms to pursue academic research to examine all areas of the housing continuum. And so the topic of such an equity tax is probably not off limits for anybody that's being funded through that. But I don't think it's an indication, and I certainly don't receive it as an indication that there's a particular policy examination for such a thing at this time.
Thanks very much. Ms. McGee, just a couple of questions on Reaching Home. We have been asked by some of the opposition parties to end Reaching Home and to send the dollars straight to provincial capitals and not to frontline services, particularly in BC by the member for Vancouver East, Ms. Kwan. What would be the impact on that on some of the prairie provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, where the support for homeless services and in particular harm reduction have been very slow to meet the frontline needs of COVID response?
Well, for our effort, I think that it would have a very negative impact. I would say that Reaching Home needs to be understood, and I think our local efforts generally, because we do administer certainly other orders of government investments in homelessness, the important underlining focus is that it is a coordinated approach and that it is a community commitment to work in a coordinated way in an alignment with ending homelessness. Harm reduction is definitely a principle of the Housing First program. The Housing First program, which is also really strongly reinforced by Reaching Home, is client-centered, focused on the potential of individuals, and agencies are really empowered, and frontline staff. And I do think that some of these things don't kind of necessarily get really generalized or understood around Housing First, is that it really empowers the decision making at the front line to support individuals in ending their homelessness in a way that has the most sustainable outcome in the long term. And that happening in a coordinated way has been critical to communities being able to really move the bar, not just for a person, not just for a program, but as a community. And in the absence of that, we run the risk of really just cycling people through other programs, and having a very programmatic structure ensures that people really just don't get the traction that we're working so hard to provide them. In terms of the $19 billion restart fund that we just delivered to the provinces and territories, how much of that have you received so far? So through Reaching Home, Homeward Trust received, and I'm just looking, about $6.4 million through our entity commitment, as well as Indigenous funding of 1.1. Those are rounded numbers. And that's out of the Restart program that we just recently shipped. It's federal money that's being distributed by the province to your. No, sorry, that was out of the initial announcement of the 1.5, the 157 million Reaching Home. Yeah. The other funding has for Homeward Trust directly. Not been cascaded through the programs that are focused on homelessness in our community. And that's the risk of funding the provinces and asking them to do federal work, is that sometimes the provinces have different priorities, and therefore the money wouldn't get to the front lines. That certainly has some risk. Yeah, and good plans, good scenario planning can't happen in a bubble, and that's the risk. And in terms of the acquisition of assets to support distancing people and quarantine people and providing health services, how many sites have your organization helped secure during COVID to provide more stable housing for individuals who are in precarious situations? We've taken a bit of a different approach, not through acquisition, but through head leasing and negotiating with a hotel operator. We have a couple of other permanent supportive housing projects in play that we're still hoping to secure capital through the CMHC grants. So we've taken an approach where we really want to both have a short game and a long game in terms of immediate crisis response, but wanting to make the best long-term investments for our community. And we did look at a lot of things initially, and we're concerned about really tying up money that needed to be kind of thought through better.
Just one last quick question. In terms of CERB, or basic income delivered by the federal government, and in terms of housing supports for individuals, the supports work better when the assets are owned, because that would drive the cost down of delivering those programs. Would you recommend that we support the acquisition of sites as we build out supportive housing networks across the country, both to deal with COVID, but also to deal with homelessness going forward?
Absolutely. I think, we really do need longer term planning when it comes to our assets and homes and housing. We are building housing for people, not just temporary transitional spaces, and it ensures that we can plan ahead. So that's achieved through acquisition, certainly thoughtfully, in ways that, when we work in community is what we aim to do. But that long-term commitment is pretty critical to being able to ensure that long-term success.
And to be clear here, basic income works, but it works better when there's affordable housing attached to it. In other words, if there's a system to tie it to, then a basic income goes further, works harder, and provides more support for people.
And it would be what we look to in terms of turning the lights on. So in terms of capital and operating capital, and then we can bring supports to the individual as they need to ensure they have the greatest opportunity for success.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. McGee, and thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Suite, nous avons
Ms. Chabot now. You have 6 minutes, Ms. Chabot. Thank you, Chair. Greetings to you, witnesses. It's nice that we've been able to see each other in the short term. My first question is for Ms. McGee. Thank you for testifying. You raised questions of homelessness, social housing. I think Alberta has its own special situation, but of course these issues come up in all provinces. Of course, during the pandemic, these issues have become even more important. You said that you were a leader in the area. I'll try to ask my question clearly for the interpreters. You yourself said in your testimony, if I understood correctly, that sometimes when it comes to community organizations, there can be some confusion with regard to the levels of government. You said that the organizations themselves understand the needs in the field. Let them govern. You said that there are ecosystems in place to respond to homelessness and the social housing problem. Do you think that the federal government should simply support through funding and let the provinces and organizations run the show?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think when we talk about organizations, there's certainly different types of organizations that fulfill different roles in both kind of crisis responses and maintaining a focus on long-term solutions. And while both are needed, if they're not coordinated, we just continue to do what we've always done. And it is a very expensive response in the long run. So there are organizations that certainly our role in working with the 25 agencies that we contract with is to really strengthen and reinforce what they are focused on and what their capacity is, and to rely on it heavily. However, no one social delivery organization, be it a shelter or a drop-in or another, necessarily will have the alignment to really focus on longer-term community successes. And there's organizations that focus on that, such as Homeward Trust and other entities across Canada. And really, it's about looking at and acknowledging that we do have a system that responds to and either helps people or in worst case scenario actually contributes to their experience of homelessness if it's not delivered really effectively and impactfully. So when we talk about those organizations, that is very much what we do in terms of prioritizing. We take really a lot of rigor around ensuring that we are having the greatest impact for our resources, and we do that as part of the added value locally. I think the other thing that I would note is that for Homeward Trust and the multiple streams of funding that we administer, we try to alleviate administrative pressure on agencies, and we are able to utilize money from different streams in a really intentional way.
Thank you for your answer. At the same time, each organization is able to see what are the best means and best solutions according to the ecosystem. Sometimes having blanket policies, well, anyway, I understand your answer. I respect your answer. I'll ask a second question now. If ever there were a second wave to the pandemic, what is it that you would fear? What would need to be done?
In Edmonton, we simply do not have the square footage to allow for and support a response with the appropriate distancing should any of our shelters have to close in response to a pandemic. So there is definitely a priority real-time focus on space. And we need to be able to mobilize resources very, very quickly. And so the ability to continue to do that relies on supporting still a coordinated approach. But the ability to do that, as we did in the first few weeks, has shifted. And our thinking, my concern is that our thinking is a little bit more kind of regressive to our more less confident approach to solving problems.
Mr. Taylor, you spoke considerably about the question of mortgages rather. You talked about the postponing of mortgage payments for at least 6 months. Why did you decide that this period of time would be necessary? Do you have numbers to back this up, or on the number of Canadians who have asked to postpone mortgage payments? My second question, does it not worry you to know that if we that when mortgage interest rates are low, that we're encouraging that there may be high household debt, and that mortgages can represent up to 3/4 of household debt, especially when interest rates are low. So how to conciliate then your proposal with the fact that 8.6 million people have asked for emergency help?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Sorry, I'll be answering in English. My French is really very poor.
Thank you for the question. The reason why we've decided that an additional 6 months extension on the mortgage deferrals is required is because the people that we think are most significantly impacted by the COVID-19 shutdown are the folks that would be in travel and tourism or hospitality related types of industries. And so we're anticipating that it's going to be at least 12 months since last April before the airline industry, for example, really just decide to get anywhere close to previous volumes. And the folks that would be involved in those industries are not generally in low-paying professions. They're in very secure roles once those activities return. So as we said, we really do expect an extension of that credit only to the folks that we anticipate who will actually have a good opportunity to be able to begin to repay those loans once they return to work. Historically, and in March, when the announcement that deferrals were available, you will probably all recall there were record-breaking numbers of phone calls to banks and lenders to try to avail themselves of those deferrals. And just because of the sheer volume of requests, the deferrals were effectively given to everybody. There wasn't an awful lot of means testing, and so there's an awful lot of people in those programs that probably didn't actually need it from a cash flow perspective, which is why, encouragingly now, we're seeing a number of people sort of voluntarily step out or begin to make those payments again. But we do think that there's some sectors of industry that likely will continue to need that support beyond September and October.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Ms. Gazan, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's really nice to see all my colleagues on the HUMA committee. It's been a minute. My first questions are for Ms. McGee. During this unprecedented time in history, as we've seen in other unprecedented times in history, critical social programs have been created that have collectively benefited all Canadians. For example, employment insurance. And I believe that now is this kind of time in history. We have a chance to restructure our economy in a way that is more just and equitable for all. And I recently introduced Motion 46 in support of a guaranteed livable basic income. That would be in addition to all current and future government and social programs, including accessible, affordable social housing. How do you think a guaranteed annual livable income in Canada could help realize our international legal obligations to ensure the human right to housing?
We have supported, certainly within the Canadian Alliance strategy, the value of a livable income. I know that there's a lot of analysis and there's more discussions to be had about that, but the pandemic really is a convergence of different groups and different levels of need. And as much as the homeless individuals that we support that are currently living rough are a day-to-day emergency concern, we look at the horizon in the next upcoming few months, and we know that many more people will come into an experience of homelessness, perhaps for the first time, and into a system that is right now quite eroded in its ability to respond, be it frontline social agency responses, the civil society, if you will, but also government programs, because individuals are really just, they have tenuous housing circumstances. And the next few months, it's been very difficult to predict. We're kind of guessing, but what we do know is that we're not ready for it.
Yeah, thank you very much. I completely agree with you, and I think with the knowledge that we could be in this for 2 or 3 more years, we need an urgent response to ensure we can keep people out of poverty. And with that, can you speak about the critical importance of ending homelessness and ensuring adequate housing for all within the government's COVID-19 response strategy? I know in my riding of Winnipeg Centre, third poorest in the country, we now have families going into shelter because we just don't have enough houses for even families, and that means kids that are becoming homeless and on the street. Another reason to speak to the importance of a guaranteed livable basic income, but how going forward is this critical in the emergency response to COVID-19?
So, in terms of the individuals that we are currently seeing, like the increased number of people living rough, they are many of our most vulnerable individuals. They have often complex needs. They are requiring a high level of support. And as our most vulnerable community members, they have very little options. And so it's very critical that right now, that's the reason we get out of bed every morning in our organization, is to end homelessness. And I would say that one of the things that really keeps us motivated is the fact that we know we can. This is something that, one person at a time, we have provided housing solutions for, and it has reduced costs in other systems. And so when we are faced with such a huge human cost, and we know we can do something about it, and in the context of a pandemic, we've been working really hard collectively in a different way and in a better way, I think it's incumbent on us to really take the moment and continue to do that work. And it is certainly a situation where it is the most vulnerable, and it's a convergence of people with different pressures. And right now we're seeing more and more people really succumb to, significant pressures on their mental health and their ability to just maintain themselves.
Yes, totally agree. I just have one last question for you. Do you believe the national housing strategy should be revised or revisited to consider the increased vulnerability and housing insecurity facing Canadians as a result of COVID-19? And I think you've spoken to a lot of that. My concern is that we have a homeless crisis, certainly in Winnipeg Centre, that I believe will grow rapidly. How should the response change as the situation rapidly changes?
The National Housing Strategy has some really important moves forward, and it was a significant step forward for our country to have such a coordinated strategy that was absent for so long. What I would really underscore is that we need to do things faster, and providing housing in a well thought out business model, which is the way the program is designed, and prioritizing vulnerable people, which it does. However, it still relies on a lot. It takes a level of risk mitigation that at the end of the day, we're just downloading on people, and they will remain in the situation that they're in for far longer if we don't expedite the program and the delivery of the decisions that have already been made.
Thank you, Ms. McGee and Ms. Gazan. Welcome back, Ms. Young. If you're good to go, excuse me, it's Mr. Viss's turn. You're next, Ms. Young.
Okay.
Stand by.
Okay,
Mr. Viss, you have the floor for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be sharing some of my time with MP Vecchio. Just a quick comment regarding Mission, British Columbia, the community I'm in right now. The number of homeless has tripled from about 63 in 2017 to 178 in 2020, more than any other municipality in the Fraser Valley Regional District. Yet, as a community, we are too small to qualify as an urban center and too big under the rule stream for the Reaching Home program. In essence, we are the missing middle. I just want to share that with my community. Right behind me, with my committee members, right behind me is actually the shelter where homeless people live. But we don't qualify for that funding. I was pleased that Abbotsford got some, but Mission really needs supports too, but we don't get it. I'm switching now to the mortgage brokers. I've heard directly from mortgage brokers regarding the Canada Emergency Business Account. They have shared that CEBA is being pegged against their mortgage debt when applying for a mortgage. In some cases, it's impacting their ability to purchase a home. Has your organization heard anything about this actually taking place? Mr. Taylor?
So I have not actually until this moment. Elaine, anything from your side there?
No, I've not heard that either. So that is new news. If that, in fact, that is happening.
Because as I understand it, the CEBA is not meant to count against someone's overall debt when applying for a home. So maybe we need to have a conversation with some of those local banks or credit unions. That was really my only big question. And with that, I will turn it over to MP Vecchio, unless you have another quick comment there, Mr. Taylor.
Only to say, please get in touch with my office directly. If you've actually got scenarios or there are constituents in your riding, we will certainly do our best to assist anybody with whatever expert knowledge we need. We have members throughout the continuum, so we'll certainly do our best to help.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm just going to move over to Ms. McGee. Ms. McGee, I was just wondering, we know that in 2016 and 2018, point-in-time counts were done, and that kind of gives us an idea of what it looks like for the homelessness and looking at those. In 2020, of course, it's being postponed. What kind of impact will that have on data collection, and what will we be able to do so that we actually have that coordinated response that you speak of?
Interesting question, because I have worked closely with the department on that through the data committee that we participate in, and it will be a data gap, but we also have communities that have been working and implementing their outreach and their registry through a by name list. Okay. So I've suggested that we have like a parallel approach to that in the absence of data, that we curate what communities do have, and most importantly, as is always the case, counts are not absolute, but they're trends, and we have really good trending information. Unfortunately, it's not a good picture.
Okay, that's great to know. And when you're looking at the first-time homelessness, I know that for many people that are unfortunately finding themselves without a home, it is a first time due to the pandemic. What does that look like? And are there any factors that we should be looking at? Is there something because of the pandemic with financial needs, or is it something to do with a variety of addictions and other things that we have occurring? What would you say is one of the biggest causes in this pandemic during that time for increased homelessness for first-timer people?
So certainly, I think that a serious look at an emergency response fund that some provinces have had, and our expansion of what is existing in terms of accessibility. Sometimes the thresholds for accessing emergency dollars are so high. We actually spend a lot of time, money, and resources just maintaining a barrier to individuals accessing supports that can transition them out of homelessness very quickly. So I think a deeper dive into that, and a recognition that for some, that is a very light touch and can happen quickly. And for others, there doesn't need to be a commitment for ongoing support so that they're not cycling back in the wrong housing situation in the first place.
Okay. Mr. Casey, how am I making out?
Still 5 seconds.
Okay, I'm going to be switching over very, very quickly to Paul Taylor. Right now, what are you seeing? I will be speaking to you shortly on the trends when it comes to the first-time home buyers getting into the market during this pandemic.
There's an awful lot of activity across the country for transactions, I think. We actually are running a series of consumer surveys, actually. The first of those reports was released just last week, and every 6 weeks between now and sort of end of the year, we'll be going back out to consumers to get their sense. We are concerned about that September-October deferral cliff, and we think it may well impact people's sentiment about what they're doing with housing. But no surprise, the lockdown has made an awful lot of people a whole lot more critical about their current living environment and whether where they're living is actually suitable for their situation. So there's been, I think, a lot of pent-up demand that is not necessarily economic, but certainly much more lifestyle-based that we've seen across the last couple of months. And as our chief economist reminds me all the time, we've been surprised by numbers every single month. We would be foolish not to expect to be surprised for the next 3 months, frankly.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor and Ms. Vecchio. And finally, we're going to go to Ms. Young for real this time. 5 minutes, Ms. Young.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair, and I apologize for that. I actually lost connection for a good 10 minutes, so I do apologize if I'm repeating anything that's already been asked. But I did notice, Ms. McGee, you mentioned how you have established new partnerships because of COVID-19, and you mentioned about hotels, and here in London, our city has been using a hotel, and I wondered about the sustainability of that model. I mean, as you said, that something's going to have to give, and what will happen to those 600 people in Edmonton who are being housed in hotels right now?
And to clarify, actually, the 600 that I cited are actually housed in apartments, being provided support. They're in self-contained units. The Housing First program relies largely on the market housing that's available and working with landlords, and they do pay rent. And so they're under the RTA. The Coliseum Inn, which we had leased, is providing approximately 100 people at any given time. It's also it's bridge housing. So it isn't housing. It's a very short term. It's helping us transition people who are living on the street as opposed to, in shelter. And we do have a very different growth in our encampment and our living rough population versus our shelter population. So it plays a different role. But I think your question about sustainability and the decisions around making short-term decisions that are, quite frankly, very expensive. When we look at per diem rates as a hotel response versus owning something that can be part of our social infrastructure in the long run, that's one of the reasons that we haven't put short-term investments into things that will kind of have greater risk in the long term. However, we do have literally a pipeline of properties that we would look at procuring and operating at a very good opportunity in terms of cost in order to have longer term solutions immediately in our community. And, I think communities that have gone that route are struggling with the costs of now what to do. That hasn't been our strategy in the short term, at least, but we certainly have a pipeline of properties that we would look at.
Okay, thank you. The concern of Indigenous homelessness has been an issue that we've grappled with in London, and I was pleased to support a motion to actually study Indigenous homelessness from MP Gazan, and it's been put on hold because of COVID, but of course the problem is that much worse. I just wondered how COVID has changed the dynamics, if at all, for Indigenous homelessness, if you could comment on that.
Edmonton certainly has a dramatic overrepresentation of Indigenous community members in our homeless community. But we have looked to the relationships with nations to try to support those nations in supporting their members where possible. That's one of the strategies that actually the COVID-19 response with Reaching Home has allowed us to do, because it created some flexibility so that we were able to work directly with nations. And we really have, amongst the organizations that are Indigenous in our community, maybe not really previously involved in homeless responses, we've been growing our relationships to have more of a community response that touches on a wider range of services, which has included prevention, providing kits for families, and helping with food security. So a lot of different relationships to work more directly around those organizations and to build new relationships with them. But we consistently see about 65% of our community that experiences homelessness is Indigenous. And within that community, there's a lot of turnover between communities as well.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to pick up on something that MP Vaughan was talking about, as far as the money flowing from the province, and maybe some of the concerns there that, and certainly some provinces, they're not getting the funds necessary in the right amount of time. What do you think is building new housing the answer to this? Is that really bottom line, that what we need to do?
We definitely need more product that is dedicated in perpetuity to a community, a sector, which is our social housing and our community housing stock. We absolutely do. We also need processes to ensure that people access those and that they are prioritized. And, honestly, a fear that I think many have in the sector is that we build new housing that then in near term isn't prioritized for the people that it was built for, and that our system needs to ensure that dedication to capital goes to the need it was intended to serve. And that's kind of how the programs that we work with right now try to message that consistently. We have haves and have-nots. We have have-nots amongst the haves and have-nots. And so the typical system will tend to start to house people that are less expensive to serve and create less overhead. And our systems need to be designed so that we ensure that the significant capital and efforts that we put in go to the people that need them.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Ms. Young. Colleagues, we're now going to suspend while we welcome Ms. Corvo. I would ask you all to stand by. I expect this will be a very brief suspension while we just do a sound check. And as mentioned before, the witnesses that are with us now have agreed to stay on in case you have other questions. Once we hear from Ms. Corvo, we stand suspended. je vais accueillir Marie-Josée Corriveau de Fonds d'Action.
We're now ready to welcome Ms. Corriveau from Front d'Action Populaire en Réaménagement Urbain, FRAPRU, an Urban Housing Rights Coalition. Ms. Corriveau, thank you for coming back to this committee. You have the floor. All right, I'll begin. As I just mentioned, my name is Marie-Josée Corriveau. I'm representing FRAPRU, an Urban Housing Rights Coalition. It was founded 41 years ago and has 140 members across Quebec. These organizations are fighting poverty and fighting for housing. Our group intervenes with governments to obtain housing for the population. With regard to the pandemic, the FRAPRU is happy to see that the CERB was quickly put in place, allowing households to meet their basic needs such as food and housing. However, FRAPRU is disappointed and even angry to see that funds were devoted to the wealthiest rather than the poorest and most vulnerable of society when it comes to the pandemic. This was the case in 2008 as well, when Canada decided mainly to help banks, businesses, and owners. We feel that our feeling of injustice is even greater. Some Quebecers have not been able to pay their rent after losing their jobs. The coming months will be very worrisome for them. These loans to help pay their rent will have to be paid, and they won't necessarily find a job. There is a close link between the right to housing and health. Housing is one of the main determinants of health, in fact. The confinement measures imposed to reduce propagation of the coronavirus were not experienced by everyone in the same manner. How can you be confined to your house if you don't have a house? How can you stay in a small house, a small apartment? How can you stay healthy when your rent takes up most of the family budget and you don't have money for food, for drugs, or for masks and internet? How can you go through this confinement when every single day you rely on community resources to eat, to live, to have somewhere to live? And these community resources must reduce their activities to ensure that social distancing is maintained. In other words, for many, many households, the pandemic is just another crisis. In the 2016 census, more than 1 million Canadian households were in a precarious situation. That is, that their housing was too small, was in poor condition. Most of these people are very poor. And in Quebec, those with core housing needs live on a very, very reduced income. Things have only gotten worse since the pandemic. There is a shortage of housing in the major Quebec cities as elsewhere. The housing stock is 1.8% and only 1.5% in Montreal and the Gatineau area. That is only half of the 3% required to ensure that there's a balance between owners and renters, tenants. In Gatineau, the market average increased by 10% between 2008 and 2009. The impacts are disastrous and they will continue. Numerous tenants have been facing undue pressure to accept rent increases, and we've seen that rents have greatly increased and much higher than the market average. Since the shortage will continue, we believe that this inflation will continue. Many Quebecers have been unable to find new housing since July. Some saw that some were evicted by their owner. The owner particularly wanted to evict them if they paid low rent because they were long-term tenants. It's difficult to find housing during a pandemic. If you don't have internet, it's even more difficult. Sometimes the rents are too expensive. Sometimes there is no housing available. Certain people are more vulnerable. They're discriminated against because of their condition, whether they're racialized or otherwise. They do not have any real recourse. The shortage is forcing people to become homeless during the pandemic. To find a new house, new housing, people must often leave their neighborhood, their city, or even their region, and in doing so, they lose their entire social network. In this context, FRAPRU hopes that the federal government will quickly renew not only its support programs, but will reinvest in social housing as foreseen in the Canada Housing Strategy. To date, the federal government has done none of this. Yet in 2017, when this strategy was adopted, the government noted that many households had core housing needs. FRAPRU at the time denounced the situation. I can give you a few examples of this. Since the beginning of the pandemic, unemployment has increased. We are close to a recession, and yet the government is investing greatly to restart the economy. FRAPRU asks that a project of social housing be started and that any projects already underway be completed. The government has the duty to help the most vulnerable and the poorest to find housing. To do so, it must stop dilly-dallying and invest in social housing and nonprofit housing. The housing market is currently unaffordable. The federal government has the means to do so. For example, it already invests in fossil fuels. This money could be spent elsewhere. There are tax advantages that have been awarded to the wealthiest of society. The government must almost more seriously fight against tax evasion and tax avoidance. But whatever the means the government takes, it must protect the most vulnerable. Otherwise, the cost to society will be extraordinary. I hope that I did not go beyond my allotted.
Probablement un défi pour.
Yes, I think that must have been a challenge for interpreters, but thank you. I sent my document in advance to help them out. So we can...
Thank you. We'll go ahead with the members' questions now. Let's start with Mr. Vies. And may I remind you, members, that you may ask your question to any witness here at the panel today. Mr. Vies, you have 10 minutes.
It's Mr. Albus.
Is it Albus or is it Vecchio?
Monsieur Albus, à vous la parole.
Je veux remercier Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your testimony. Recently, the Canadian government announced that it would send one payment of $600 for people living with disabilities to help them with additional costs that these people must deal with during the COVID-19 pandemic. The government recently announced that this payment will be given in the fall, months after Canadians were hit by the financial consequences of COVID-19. In light of your own working experience with people living in affordable housing and social housing, would these people do they have financial difficulties because of a disability? And so would it be important that a tax break be given instead of this check? we must remember that most people who live with a physical disability, in Quebec anyways, I don't know if this is the case for the rest of the country, but most of the people in Quebec living with physical disabilities have very low wages. They have very little income. They don't have any savings. They spend the checks that they receive day by day because it's the only way for them to make ends meet. They're in survival mode. The second problem is that there's a lack of housing, and namely housing that is adapted to people living with disabilities. And so these people are isolated in their homes pretty much year-round and already have a lot of difficulty finding resources that could help them out. It's already difficult for them to move around and to get around to places. And so in this context, when you cannot count on any of your savings, we can't ask people to pay for things themselves. The government must increase transfers to provinces and incentivize provinces to increase benefits for people living on social aid. And don't ask these people living with disabilities to pay these extra costs. It's the government's role, and it should be done through the CERB. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, I agree with your assessment. So according to what you've heard from people and families living in social housing, and considering the position of your organization, what worries you in the future? How could we help keep people in adequate housing? And what resources do you need? What help do you need? So I'm glad that you asked me this question because I couldn't speak about it in my presentation. I didn't have any room. So I'm talking of renovation and modernization of social housing. The government contributed to building this social housing 25 years ago, but the federal government has responsibilities towards provinces and territories and towards the families that live in social housing. But this housing has been neglected. There was no maintenance of these different housing units. And so in Quebec, we have a huge deficit. And it has led to some of these social housing units being foreclosed. They're uninhabitable because we failed to maintain them and keep them up to par. And so it is estimated that Quebec needs $420 million a year in order to rehabilitate 71,000 units of affordable housing. One promoter owns about 300 affordable housing units and would need $1.2 billion to complete its modernization and rehabilitation plan that was launched in 2007. And one of my counterparts in Montreal that is responsible for social housing just received her budget for the year 2020-2021. And with this budget, she will not even be able to bring these housing units up to par so that they can be rented out. These housing units are vacant because the families that occupied them or the tenants that occupied them had to leave for X, Y, and Z reason. So we're not even able to patch up and modernize these apartments so that they be made available to people, which is incredible. And it is the responsibility of the provincial and the federal government, but I think it is mainly the Quebec government's role because they're the one giving the brunt of the financing. And for years, for decades, the plans that were proposed by different groups and municipalities were rejected. And the sums that are in Canada's national housing strategy are not sufficient. And what scandalizes us is that the government has said that it would not subsidize the rent of families that are occupying these housing units. And so it will be up to neighbors over the next few years and up to provinces and municipalities and territories to take responsibility. And it makes no sense that the federal government would abandon poor families and poor Canadians in this way. That's my second argument. My third argument is considering the need for social housing. We know that in a number of Quebec cities and in Canadian cities, there has been a stark increase in rent costs. And so poor families are unable to live in the city. They would have to work way too much, and they just cannot afford it. And so the government has wanted to put in place affordable housing, but this affordable housing is not affordable for a good number of poor families. Affordability is a very elastic concept, and so it doesn't mean the same thing to different people. And so we need to have rent be affordable by tenants. And subsidizing rent is the only way that we can make these housing units available and affordable. We must also renovate social housing. Canada is ranks 16th in the OECD for affordable housing on its territory. We're a G7 members. It makes no sense that we abandon poor families and poor individuals. And so I think that the government has to completely overhaul the way that it funds social housing and must concentrate its efforts in this sector. The private market always is on the hunt for profit. And so we can't really criticize the private market. Thank you, Ms. Corriveau. So Mr. Albus had 6 minutes, but we went over that by a wide margin. So now it will be Mr. Kuzmiuchik's turn. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to say what an excellent conversation we're having here this afternoon. And just wanted to thank my colleagues for the excellent questions, and I wanted to thank the panelists for the excellent responses as well. My question is directed to Ms. McGee and Madame Corriveau. I'm not sure if Ms. McGee is available, but Vancouver recently did its annual homeless count, and for the first time they used race-based data. And what they revealed, what they confirmed, is that people who identified as Black and as Indigenous were disproportionately represented among the homeless population. Statistics Canada recently released its labor force survey, again using disaggregated race-based data for the first time, and it revealed that COVID-19 is hitting hard Canadians that identify, for example, as South Asian Canadians, Arabic Canadians, Black Canadians, and Indigenous. The question that I have is how important is the gathering of disaggregated race-based data when it comes to housing homelessness, and why is that important?
Is there an order you'd like us to respond in? I can, yeah. I would just comment in general that it's very important that we data, information, everything we know prepares us better for solutions, and it's important in sharing with the rest of Canadians and recognizing that the pandemic has really hit some of our most marginalized community members the hardest, and amongst those experiencing racism. And so that data goes to support that. It obviously needs to be collected with care and good intention for sure. I do really, adhere to the principle that we are best positioned to solve a problem the better that we understand it. And one of the things about the pandemic is that it has clearly demonstrated that those that have been previously marginalized and have difficulty accessing support services and employment have had an even more difficult time at this juncture.
Oh, thank you very much. I would maybe ask Madame Corriveau for her opinion on this.
On a un premier problème, c'est que oui, je suis d'accord avec tout ce que.
So, yes, I agree with what was said. We do need data that will give us the clearest possible portrait of the situation in order to implement durable solutions. But regarding homelessness, how do we count the number of homeless people, and what is a good way to count and a bad way to count? So in Montreal, it was said that there were about 3,000 people living in homelessness, but this is not what we've seen on the ground, because what was counted was people who at one point or another were homeless during one day. But this didn't take into account people who were homeless but could sleep with at a friend's place or a family's place, namely homeless women who no longer have a home, but by any means possible will avoid sleeping on a park bench, for example. But that doesn't mean that they aren't homeless. They just aren't qualified as such because they're not sleeping rough. So I think that the number of people living in homelessness is skewed. And we really need to take into account all possible scenarios. And if we did, I think that the numbers would be much higher than the ones that we currently have. But what I have noticed, homelessness in Indigenous populations have been well documented in Quebec, namely in Montreal and Gatineau, as well as in other cities, but namely in these two major cities. As for racialized people, some indexes were created, but I don't think that we really counted how many there were. So I don't know if the technique that we're currently using is the adequate one. We know that in Montreal there are an increasing number of racialized people that are sleeping rough. It is, quote unquote, fairly recent. I don't know if that means that it's a higher proportion than in the general population. I wouldn't be able to tell you that. But what I would like to insist on is the fact that the method must be overhauled, because it gives us a skewed idea, a skewed sense of comfort, or a skewed sense of progress that is in contradiction with what is happening on the ground.
Less than a minute, Mr. Kuzmerchik.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your answers. That gives us a lot of food for thought. Much appreciated. We know that through the Reaching Home initiative, we know that there is an Indigenous homelessness funding stream. I just wanted to ask really both of you again, just to comment on, compared to the general population, do Indigenous people experience homelessness? Do they face additional or different vulnerabilities when it comes to COVID-19?
When it comes to COVID-19, I think if we look at the pandemic and the bottleneck that it has created on accessing so many services, any population as disproportionately impacted by poverty and homelessness as our Indigenous community, it would be exponential. So I think it's. I don't want to oversimplify the response, but I think it's in the numbers, and it's in the experience, and it's in the challenges that just where is home. And, in terms of being able to isolate in place, being able to manage in some circumstances, situations where several people are living in the same home. And if somebody becomes ill, there are compounding factors for sure. But it is really just an amplification of a challenge that the most restrictive processes are going to hurt the most vulnerable the most.
Merci. Ça, c'est tout le temps.
Thank you. That's all the time we had for Mr. Kuzmerchik. We now move on to Ms. Chabot for 6 minutes.
Madame Corriveau, un plaisir.
The interpreter would like to say that Ms. Chabot's mic is in the wrong position. It's impossible to hear her at the moment.
Des revendications et des préoccupations que vous avez envers.
Madame Chabot, pouvez-vous bouger?
Ms. Chabot, would you mind please lowering your mic, please? Yes, of course, Mr. Chair. My apologies. It was, I had raised it. Thank you for getting me back on track. So, Ms. Corriveau, welcome. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you for your testimony. I know your organization very well, and I think that your recommendations today are very much in line with your positions in the past. I think you said that for homeless families, only in July 2020, there were 350 families without a house, and that was the highest it's been since 2003. For years and years, organizations have been saying that the real number perhaps is even higher. Now, if that is true, it demonstrates that there is a lack of housing. Perhaps we can draw a distinction between social, subsidized, or community housing. The National Housing Strategy, as you know, is a deal that's been reached with every province without Quebec. And in Quebec, that could mean between $1.4 and $1.7 billion, which isn't nothing. So according to you, if those funds had been given to Quebec without conditions, how different could the situation have been? I think the Quebec government might have been more generous towards for its new programs on social housing. There was a first challenge. The first challenge was to create 15,000 new units of social housing, which still hasn't materialized because the funding wasn't in line with the new economic reality, the new housing costs. So I hope the Quebec government, if it had received funds from the federal government, could have improved its programs. Now, that being said, I would say that my main problem right now is that the federal government, saying that this is a provincial responsibility, has developed funds or programs and intervenes in solution finding in lieu of provinces instead of giving them the resources to find their own solutions. And so, yes, I do think the federal government should give money like it should, fulfill its responsibilities when it comes to climate change and housing, and respect the conventions dating all the way back to 1994 and transfer more money to the provinces. That would mean that in Quebec, unlike other provinces, go faster when it comes to building new units of social housing. But like I said earlier, we can't turn to the private sector to build social housing. It's impossible to access these housing with an income of $17,000 or $20,000 a year. If we want to reach our goal of real social housing, it has to be subsidized, and it has to be social housing, and it has to be funded and maintained properly for future generations. You have 1 minute left, Ms. Shabat. Thank you. Last question. With everything we know today, if there was to be a second wave of COVID-19, which we don't want, of course, what would be your main worries, and what should we do right now to increase predictability? I'll try to say quickly what I've already said. We need to make sure people have enough income to have adequate housing. because it's the first condition to remaining healthy. We have to start working right away on social housing, whether existing or needing to be built. And we know that even though the government has printed a lot of money over the past month, money doesn't grow on trees. And we will have to ask big businesses, wealthy Canadians to support this effort in order to have a real wealth redistribution in our country. It's a real challenge. Thank you, Ms. Chabot. We will now go to Ms. Gazan. Ms. Gazan, you have 6 minutes.
Thank Mr. Chair, and my questions are for Madame Corriveau. I apologize, I'll have to ask them in English. I am taking French classes though, so maybe the next time. I really appreciated your comments on the need to invest in not just affordable housing, but affordable social housing. That certainly, there's a huge difference between the two. I wanted to speak more specifically to persons with disabilities who have been, from my opinion, completely disregarded during the pandemic, including a real housing strategy with real investments in affordable, accessible social housing. I'm wondering if you could speak more to that.
Qu'est-ce que je pourrais vous dire?
Well, what more can I say? We don't have a real clear picture of how COVID affected every group, except for what I've said earlier or what we've seen in the news. The people I've spoken to over the past month were people who were affected by COVID, but were already affected by lack of housing, lack of secure housing. And if it's true in Quebec and the provinces, it's even more true in territories and Indigenous communities. So we have to focus on funding new housing as quickly as possible. If we do not do that, we know what will happen. Scientists have told us that over the coming years, there will be more pandemics. We're going through one right now. We know how hard it is, but there will be more in the future because we're facing real environmental problems. And in that context, we have to act quickly in order to avoid the worst. And that's my main message. Yes, there are immediate steps that need to be taken in order, for example, to help people on low income to access housing. We have to subsidize this access because we can't ask them to dip into their retirement savings. They don't have any. They don't have home equity. They don't have any real assets that they can sell in order to access housing. And the second thing is to have social housing as quickly as possible. But when I say that, we know that this social housing needs to be built adequately so that it can be maintained throughout the years. I hope this answers your question. We know that for people living with disabilities, there have been cries for help, but it's very hard to quantify the problem. We know that there has always been a problem of housing for people with disabilities.
So just to expand on that, would you say that it's important for the government to collect data? I know we talked about, for Black, Indigenous peoples, but also for persons with disabilities, there seems to be a real gap in data collection. Can you expand on that, please?
Oui, je suis d'accord avec vous.
Yes, I agree with you because, well, every time there's a census, we publish a report using Statistics Canada's data, and we don't have a clear picture of people with disabilities because the data comes not from households but from people themselves. So we don't know if a person with disability lives in a household that has specific needs. So yes, it would be very useful to have more disaggregated data, and having that data, we could quantify the problem better and then find more appropriate solutions.
And just one last question in that regard. Would you say that the failure to collect data further marginalizes disabled persons from accessing their human right to housing? Madame
Plus, là où j'ai une hésitation, Madame.
The only hesitation I have, and I agree with you on the need for better data. However, looking at the problems faced with for people with disabilities, what I see is that right now we can't really quantify the problem, because there are all sorts of strategies that homeless women especially use to hide the fact that they are homeless, but are nevertheless homeless. They sleep at friends' house. They go through violence in order to avoid sleeping in the streets. Over the spring, we've learned how many women went through dangerous situations in order to avoid sleeping in the streets, and because shelters for women going through violence were limited because of the pandemic. So many women did not receive the help they needed because of the pandemic. And so I don't want to rank who is in a worse position, but of course having better data on people with disabilities would be helpful, but I can't tell you if they are the most marginalized. Thank you, Ms. Corriveau. Ms. Gazan?
Ms. Gazan, you're out of time.
Am I out
sorry.
of time? Sorry, I had
OK. Suite, c'est le tour des conservateurs. Est-ce que ça va?
So next is Ms. Vecchio for 5 minutes. Ms. Vecchio.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Taylor. First of all, I'd really like to thank Ms. Corriveau and Ms. McGee for talking about the one under the continuum as we're looking at it. And when I look at housing, I look at the whole thing and the impact that simple physics measure that whenever there's, one action, you're going to get the opposite reaction as well. So I look at that. And when we're talking about the housing and homelessness, we also have to look at the other end. But my major concern right now is in the middle of this continuum. And just some statistics that I was looking at from CREA, the Canadian Associated Real Estate Agents. One of the greatest concerns, or the association, one of the greatest concerns I have right now is about supply. And right now that they're at a 16-year low inventory, first time in 16 years. And in my community, they're at about 1.1. So we're looking at the months, it's about 1.1 right now. And we should be having averages between 5 and 8 months of inventory. So this is just way out. And the average cost of a house in Canada now is $571,500. We know that it's gone up. Of course, there was going to be, people wanting to get into market. So we were going to expect a bit of a boom here when we see that sales had gone up by 26% in the month of July. But I'm really concerned about the impact. And I'm just going to tell you a little story about my own community. People who live in Toronto, I know they love to have Mr. Vaughan there, but they like to move to my community where they're going to get a more affordable house, a variety of different things. And especially with COVID, we have backyards, we have so many great things, but we're seeing the price of housing going up. And just recently, a house that was on sale for $289,000 went over the asking price by $83,000. That's almost a 33% increase. So that's what we're seeing in my community for especially first-time home buyers. People are trying to get in the housing market. So what do you think that the federal government needs to do, or what are some of the things that we should be aware of as we're moving forward, knowing that we have a low inventory, knowing that first-time home buyers are being pushed out of the market because we're going to see such high prices right now, and knowing that right now with the turbulence for many people financially, how are they going to be able to get a mortgage?
Well, thank you very much indeed for the question. How long do I have?
Go for it.
There's definitely going to be pricing pressures on real estate, I think, for the next foreseeable future. I think there's a shortage of supply of housing almost everywhere, and it's been exacerbated by a number of different factors, especially in the already quite dense areas, Toronto and Vancouver. We've had internal migration to those areas. Immigration tends to flock to those regions as well. They're economic engines. That's generally where employment exists, and so that's where people go. We are unable really to keep pace of demand with additional supply. It's something we definitely need to be spending more time thinking about. It would probably be really beneficial for the government as a whole actually to start discussing emergency measures almost to create housing supply in all forms. Social housing is definitely needed. Definitely government supported and subsidized properties are needed. But almost rather than investing in something like a first-time home buyer's incentive plan, for example, where the government is owning a portion of equity, perhaps the government should actually become the primary investor in some commercial spaces that they themselves would resell off to other individuals. Oftentimes, it's the investment that gets a property project kickstarted in the private sector. And so if the government's comfortable owning property as a percentage, potentially they might want to think about owning projects to get them going. Ultimately, of course, with the goal to provide that inventory back out to Canadians.
Yeah.
I think we really need to focus on trying to promote owner occupation of properties, though, rather than keeping properties potentially reserved for investor purchases. And I understand that we are concerned about overall levels of indebtedness in Canada, but by continuing to address the supply-demand imbalance by adding demand tapping measures, we're always seemingly excluding the folks that would be the young and upcoming or the people at the bottom end of the economic ladder that frankly need the most support.
Yeah.
And the people that are really transitioning from what would be social community housing through rental housing and then onto that first rung of the ladder. As we continue to make it more difficult to extend credit to those folks, we are effectively keeping those properties on sale, as it were, for investor purchases. And those people still need to live somewhere. So they're definitely going to be renting from those now sort of amateur landlords. And as supply there becomes continually constrained, we're actually not assisting their monthly carrying costs at all. So.
And adding to that, we're just hearing that the cost of softwood lumber is going to go up by about 30%. So the cost here in our community, one of the hardware stores just explained to me, it's going to be an increase of 30%. So if we're trying to build a house and one of the main things that it needs is framing, and that's a 30% increase in the cost of creating this house, what are some other factors that we should also look at, and what can we do to help there? I mean, that's obviously probably a trade negotiation that just hasn't been happening, but what can we do there?
Short answer, please.
Unfortunately, in that instance, I'm not sure we can do very much. It's something like the pricing of the raw materials is very much a supply and demand constraint. You can't really legislate your way into securable pricing in that, unfortunately.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Vecchio and Mr. Taylor. Over to Mr. Vaughn, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much to Madame Corriveau. Would you agree that if the federal government puts new dollars on the table for provinces, the provinces should not be allowed to cut provincial spending limits on housing? So as we put money in the front door for the housing system, the Quebec government should be required not to take money out the back door so that it becomes a wash. Would you agree that's a reasonable request by the federal government?
De réduire leur propre
reduce their own contribution. I completely agree. And I think that if the federal government put the money on the table, there should be conditions attached, as has happened in the past. I do not want the federal government to produce programs rather than that should be done by provinces and territories. I think the government must go further and recognize the right to housing, must go back to its strategy and develop social housing, and ensure that the provinces don't use government money that's put on the table for housing.
rent supplement programs, for example, the Canada Housing Benefit, which aims to subsidize rents for the very individuals you talked about. If the federal government has a program that requires cost matching dollars from the provinces, should the provinces have to match the new program, or should they be allowed to say we're already doing that, therefore we don't have to add any of our new dollars? Should provinces be brought into a stronger housing system with federal authority as long as it's provincially designed and delivered? Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure what you mean by a more solid system. I think we need to ensure, we need to take into account what provinces have, and monies awarded to the provinces should allow them to go beyond their current goals. If I give the example of Quebec.
But not surrender their current goals or refuse to participate.
Generally, as far as I know, the federal government in various areas forces the provinces and territories to accept money subject to certain conditions. And if these conditions are not met, then there are penalties.
Right. For example, that it should be spent on rent supplements and it should be new money. That's a reasonable request from the federal government.
Oui.
Okay. And in terms of housing program, if we're expending federal dollars, if we're expending federal dollars in capital programs, is it reasonable, based on your assessment of disabilities, to ask for new housing to meet minimum standards around accessibility? For example, the National Housing Strategy requires all new builds to be 20% accessible. Is that a reasonable social goal that a province could sign on to?
No, that doesn't work. That's a good example. Canada is going too far in that case. Yes, I do want the government to say the money should go to people with core housing needs, but what you're suggesting is that municipalities or territories these municipalities have needs that are greater than 20%, and elsewhere the needs are less than 20%. So do we need to build social housing for communities that don't need it, whereas other communities don't have enough money? It's the
disabilities can live in accessible housing. It doesn't require a person with disabilities to live there, but if it's purpose-built from the start, it's there in the future to be used. So it's reasonable to set social parameters around social spending, especially when it's addressing people's charter rights. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree with the principle. There's not enough money. I think we can agree on that. There's not enough money to meet all the needs. As far as I know, the Canada Housing Strategy aims for 330,000 social housing units when there's over 1 million Canadian households that need proper housing. Can we agree that for a short time, there should be no rules so that we can respond to the needs expressed by the milieu? And once we have a sufficient number of social housing units, then we can set up conditions or constraints. Otherwise, some communities build housing that's not appropriate. If you have adapted housing, it's more expensive, and it costs more then. You have less housing units available. What is the most important thing right now is to start housing projects. We need social housing that takes into account, subsidized housing that takes household income into account. But we need to have something that's new. We do not want too tight a framework.
We have, colleagues, we have about 4 minutes left, so we have time for one more round of questions. It's the Conservatives' turn. Is there someone on the Conservative side that would like to take up the last 4 minutes?
Mr. Albus will proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Albus.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to go to Mr. Taylor, please. Mr. Taylor, appreciate the explanation you've given. Obviously, COVID-19 has created a lot of challenges for policymakers. Now, you've talked a little bit about the Office of the Superintendent for Financial Institutions, about making some minor changes to allow for banks and other mortgage carriers to have a 5% pocket, I guess, or a set aside, so that it doesn't affect their overall amount of mortgages that they have that are under deferral. Could you just maybe elaborate on that, why that would be important to offering some flexibility for those borrowers, but also for the institutions?
Yeah, certainly happy to, and thank you very much for the question. Quite simply, when the mortgage deferral programs were first created, all banks and lenders, as regulated by OSFI, have to retain additional minimum capital for any loans that are non-performing. It's prudent, of course. They need to have a stockpile of cash in the event that the loans that are currently in arrears don't ever actually find their footing and are sort of make their way to repayment. So as a means to assist with the liquidity of the banks and allow them to continue to extend credit, OSFI agreed to allow deferred loans specifically to not be considered non-performing, which means that the banks do not have to set aside that additional minimum capital. As reported at the beginning, the CBA says somewhere around 16% of mortgage holders have deferred their mortgage at some point. We're actually seeing that number reduce, which is great to see. It's what we would hope to see as the economy sort of comes back. But we do expect there'll be pockets which will be quite industry specific that are going to take a little bit more time. If OSFI was to allow for an extension of the deferral program with some parametered constraints, I think a 5% as a maximum allowable target within a mortgage portfolio is quite reasonable, actually, to allow the banks themselves to set parameters around how they're going to means test or who is actually going to be eligible to enjoy a continued deferral. There will, of course, be assessments of expected future earning capacity for the folks that the banks would extend this to. But it would be a nice accommodation for the folks that are likely going to still feel the effects of COVID for a little while longer, and permit the banks actually the flexible financial freedom to be able to provide that extension as well.
So this brings up 2 points. Number one is, first of all, the banks would not have to immediately foreclose and put a lot of people in a lot of stress trying to go through the system to recover their mortgage. But then second of all, it also would make sure there would not be suddenly a lot of homes going on the market at reduced rates. Now, obviously, that may please some people, but again, that can cause, especially if you're in a particular neighborhood that is dependent on one mill or a large factory, that could be a big factor.
Very much so. You actually hit both nails on the head there. So no lender either wants to have to liquidate a whole bunch of properties, because it's quite an expensive and labor intensive process, and you really do create dislocations for families, and nobody really wants that. You also don't want to create a glut of inventory in any given market, because house price erosion is actually really poor for the local economy, as we've talked about, sort of the wealth effect or the psychology of people's expectation of their own financial security starts to reduce. So it's in everybody's best interest, frankly, and especially given that we are at historically low interest rates at the moment, to allow folks the opportunity to be able to capitalize whatever the deferred portion of their mortgage would be. It will probably be quite a small long-term additional interest cost to them, frankly, and the financial institutions would be far happier, frankly, to be able to see that loan return to being a performing loan rather than have to go through a foreclosure process and actually liquidate the property.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Albus. And thank you to all of the witnesses for being with us twice and for being so patient and so thorough in your responses. I also want to offer a sincere thank you to the interpreters and to the IT people who have been able to work through the fairly significant challenges to have the meeting run flawlessly today. So to one and all, thank you so much. The testimony today will be very helpful to the work of the committee. And to my colleagues, we'll see you next week. We're adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.